Hey friends, how are you all? Hello. Time for an Instagram live with Neil Katyal. Hi everybody. It's 11:30. Hello, hello, hello. And I thought we'd hop on to have Neil explain to us in a very succinct, coherent way what is going on with these charges in Georgia, the latest charges that Fulton County DA Fani Willis has filed against Donald Trump. And Neil is, hi everybody. I am actually in Fenwick, Connecticut, where Katharine Hepburn lived. I'm here visiting a friend of mine who I've known since my 20s, who she and I worked in local news together in Washington. So I thought it might be helpful so we don't have to watch cable news all day long and kind of piece this together for Neil to kind of explain. How you
I'm
doing?
doing all right. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. There's a lot to unpack with this latest indictment against a total of 19 people, right, Neil? So I thought we could just help people understand the latest and maybe the timing of all these cases, and also wanted to talk to you about the appointment of a special counsel to investigate Hunter Biden. So let's just start with last night. So it was announced at 10:54 p.m. Eastern time that a grand jury had indicted Donald Trump and 18 allies after a 2-year probe of efforts to flip Georgia's 2020 election results. Okay, let me just review some of the allies. They include Mark Meadows, which is interesting because he was absent from some of the other indictments, the one specifically having to do with January 6th. Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, John Eastman, we've heard his name a lot, the Trump lawyer, Sidney Powell, Kenneth Chesebro. All right, so Neil, I think what's really confusing is that Fani Willis used the RICO statute. Now, my late husband, who was a white collar criminal defense lawyer, I think dealt with this a lot. But I thought you could explain why she used that particular legal approach.
Okay, so good to be with you and to see all of your viewers again. So first, let me just kind of set the stage. So this is the fourth indictment of Donald Trump. Trump has already been indicted first in New York for financial improprieties, second in Florida by the federal government, by Special Prosecutor Jack Smith for stealing classified and sensitive national security documents, third in Washington, D.C., again by Jack Smith, a federal prosecution involving January 6th and the events before January 6th and Trump's attempt to try and steal the 2020 election. And now, fourth, there's a separate charge in Georgia. This is local district attorney, so it is nothing to do with the federal Justice Department or Joe Biden or Merrick Garland or any of those people. This is purely a local matter. And there, you're absolutely right, Katie. This is a charge that's really centered on what we call RICO, which is the Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was passed at the federal level in 1970. In Georgia, it was passed in 1980, the state counterpart. And it's basically saying if you have a conspiracy, if you engage, if let's say you and I, Katie, agree to rob a bank, that itself is a crime as long as and it's a conspiracy, and if we have a pattern of it, if we do it 2 or more times, then that violates the supercharged conspiracy statute, which we call RICO. And the advantage of conspiracy doctrine is that it is not something in which we actually have to carry out the completed act. If you and I agree to rob the bank and don't actually do it, we've still committed a crime,
Mhm.
so long as there's an overt act in furtherance of that conspiracy, a phone call or something like that. So here, what this prosecution is trying to say, and it tells a really compelling, fairly gripping story over almost 100 pages, is that Trump conspired with those individuals you just named, people like Mark Meadows and Rudy Giuliani, and a whole bunch of others, 18 others, to try and steal the 2020 election.
Why did they use this RICO approach? What were the alternatives? Because isn't RICO generally used for like organized crime?
So it certainly, RICO has its roots in organized crime, but even in the Georgia statute in 1980, what they passed it for was what they called, quote, the increasing sophistication of various criminal elements. So it doesn't require like a formal mob or anything like that, like an organized crime thing. You know, I would say that the indictment paints a pretty damning picture of the Trump operation, making it look very much structured like those illegal enterprise operations. But you don't need to show that at all to win a RICO charge. All you need to show is that there was this illegal agreement and a pattern of racketeering activity. And here there's over 90 different overt acts that are alleged in several different instances of Trump trying to, steal the
Now,
election.
a couple things. This is, if convicted, he cannot be pardoned for this crime. Is that accurate, Neil?
That is accurate. So Georgia is fairly unique among states. So first of all, any prosecution in a state can't be pardoned by the U.S. president. It's a state offense. So, and that's true in all 50 states. But you can have state pardons. So, for example, if you commit a crime in New York, the governor of New York, I believe, can pardon you. That's true in many states, but not true in Georgia. In Georgia, it requires the pardon board, which is 5 members named by the governor, to pardon someone. But here, the more important problem is that under Georgia law, you have to serve your sentence for 5 years before you're eligible for a pardon. And so Trump might be eligible one day, but it's far off in the future. And that's what makes this different. Sorry, just one quick thing. That's what makes this different than 2 of the indictments I started talking about, the Jack Smith indictments in Florida and Washington, D.C., because with those, a Republican in 2024 who wins the 2024 election, whether it's Trump or anyone else, can basically pardon or order those prosecutions dropped, those federal prosecutions. That's why it's so important.
I understand, Neil, that his legal team might try to get this moved to federal court. A, can they do that? And B, why would they want to?
So they'd want to do it, just to take the latter question first, because I think they're really afraid of cameras and televising this trial. And federal rules don't permit cameras in the courtroom without a special exception. Now, I think that exception should be kicked in, but that's something that the Chief Justice of the United States, along with what's called the Judicial Conference, would have to approve. I really hope that happens, but Trump, I think, gains a big advantage in this not being televised and allowing him to spin everything outside of the courtroom. Prosecutors can't respond. They can't talk the way, under prosecutorial ethics, the way that the defendant can. And so I think it would create a huge misinformation opportunity or disinformation opportunity. And that's, I think, why Trump would want this removed to federal court. Now, there is a statute that allows, to go to your first question, there's a law that does allow in certain instances a case to be removed to federal court. It wouldn't mean federal charges. It would still be state charges. And so it still would be ineligible for a presidential pardon or something like that. But the venue would be in a federal courtroom with a federal judge presiding with federal rules. Trump tried this in New York already. It failed. There are some different elements here. So I could see this, being something that will be tied up in litigation for the next month. I don't think it should take longer than that. And ultimately, I think the public's interest in seeing this trial televised should be one of the guiding features.
Neil, is it, by the way, if you all have questions for Neil, you can ask in the questions saying we were having some random comments, and it's also covering Neil's face, which we don't want to do. But Neil, will the trial automatically, if it is in Fulton County, Georgia, will it automatically be televised?
I think, yeah, it's pretty automatic. The judge has already said that it will be televised. So, and that's how Georgia trials work. It's different in some other states, like Minnesota generally has a flat ban. I was involved in the very first trial on television, the George Floyd murder, and I think that worked really well. So even though the tensions are high and lots of public interest in the case, I think the televising of the trial really was important for all Americans to see it, and I think this has at least that kind of gravity.
Okay, let me me just do some questions from social. Then I want to talk to you about the timing of all these trials, Neil, because I think that's the big question. Like, how are they going to be staggered? How it will affect the election, et cetera, et cetera. Um, Let me just tell you what we're getting from social. What is the difference between Donald Trump being tried federally versus by the state? I think you just explained that. The primary difference is cameras in the courtroom, correct?
Well, that's one main difference. There are others like the rules of evidence and things like that. So, even the jury, who's going to be on the jury. So there are a bunch of differences.
Okay, someone asked, can you explain the racketeering angle of the Georgia probe, which I think you did earlier, why the RICO statute is being used? Someone asked, didn't Donald Trump try to do the same thing in Arizona? Will he be indicted for that as well?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about this indictment, that's a great question, is that it really does single out Trump's fake elector schemes. So basically what happens in the normal elections that we've had every single time before is that you vote, you cast your ballot, it goes to the state, they count all the ballots, maybe in individual counties, but then at the end of the day, it's certified by the Secretary of State and says, Trump won or whoever won, Biden. And then those electoral votes of that state are deemed given to the winner. Now, what Trump tried to do is to say in 7 different states, oh, I don't trust those, so I'm going to have my own fake slate of electors to the Electoral College. That is not a thing. Trump called it like alternative electors. No, it's, purely, as the Georgia indictment calls it, forgery. They were passing off people as electors who weren't electors because we, the people, had voted for someone else. Now, the question that was asked here is, doesn't this apply in other states, not just Georgia? And the answer is 100% yes, every day of the week. So Arizona looks like a possible place for criminal investigation, Pennsylvania and others, and anyone involved in this plot risks being charged with forgery, conspiracy, and the like. And any of those people may ultimately flip and give evidence over to the prosecution against Trump officials and perhaps even Trump himself.
Are there ongoing investigations in those states?
I think Arizona, we know that there is one, but I'm not aware necessarily of the others, but I'm not the best person on that.
Speaking of flipping, Neil, is there a chance that I was listening to various reports about this, that some of these 18 people will flip and help the prosecution in this case? And are they tried in sort of smaller bundles, like groups of 5?
Yeah. So I think it's not just a possibility. I think it's a certainty that there will be flipped defendants in this case and flipped witnesses. So, one of the things about RICO is it's structured to encourage flipping and to encourage people to come in and assist the prosecution. And the district attorney here, Fannie Willis, I think, is using RICO to try and do that. Anyone, whether it's Mark Meadows or Rudy Giuliani or any of these people, has to understand that they are looking at very serious jail time unless they come in and tell the truth. And, Katie, one of the most interesting things about the indictment is the tantalizing prospect that Georgia has already flipped key witnesses. So Act 90 in the indictment refers to a December 18th, 2020 Oval Office meeting that Donald Trump's at, along with other people like Sidney Powell. And it refers to someone named unindicted co-conspirator individual number 20, who is known to the grand jury. So what that means is that someone was in the Oval with the president and wasn't indicted. The question is, why weren't they indicted? The most logical explanation is because that person is flipped.
Do we have any sense who that is, Neil?
Some people, it's unclear. There's some speculation about that, but I don't really know who. But it's someone who was in the Oval Office, so that's someone who's in the president's inner circle. Looks like providing evidence to the prosecution.
Someone is asking on social, why hasn't Lindsey Graham been indicted? Could he still be? Because I know that is it Fannie or Fanny? I hear her name pronounced different ways.
I think it's the latter, but I'm
okay.
no expert on that.
Anyway, the DA, Ms. Willis, questioned Senator Graham in Georgia election probe about that phone call. he made to Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger shortly after the election. So why isn't Lindsey Graham a part of this?
Unclear. Again, he might be cooperating, or it might be that he himself didn't really do much with respect to the conspiracy. I mean, any of these is possible. So, prosecutors do have to make choices about who to indict. Here, they did cast a fairly wide net, but that's because a lot of these people had really serious involvement with the crimes. I mean, Sidney Powell or Jeffrey Clark trying to corrupt the Justice Department to do these kinds of things. Again, I should say, all of these are allegations. They're all entitled to the presumption of innocence. But you read that indictment and you can't come away but thinking, boy, something really, really horrible happened here.
Let's talk about the timing of these trials and when they'll take place. And is Fani Willis or Fannie Willis coordinating with the Justice Department in terms of when all these trials will take place, and how will they impact the election cycle?
Yeah, it's unthinkable to me that they aren't coordinating, just like you would coordinate in any case, including a major one. And so yesterday she kind of refused to answer that question at her press conference, which I can understand why she refused, but I think it's fair to say there is coordination going on. I really hope there's coordination going on because, like, suppose that you're a federal prosecutor and you see the indictment yesterday and you see that Mark Meadows has been indicted. Now, he wasn't indicted, Katie, in the federal January 6th Jack Smith indictment in Washington, D.C. And, the federal prosecutors might have been thinking, by not indicting him, we can get him to testify against Trump. But
Right.
if he now faces criminal exposure in Georgia, he will assert the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in the federal prosecution in Washington, D.C., and now you magically won't have his evidence all of a sudden. So I sure hope there's coordination. I don't even know, and I suspect there is, but we don't know for sure.
Okay, so do you know when these trials will take place, or is that all still being figured out by the various lawyers? Because we have 4 of them now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. Donald Trump evaded all sorts of trials and the reach of the law for so many years, but now it's all catching up with him. There's 4 different criminal indictments, as I started your show with. There's also, the Jean Carroll case and, other civil case trials that are really big deals for him as well, all that need to be sort of organized one to the other. I suspect that the federal January 6th trial will move first, but that's remains to be seen. But I suspect that's what will happen, and I suspect that trial will start in December or January. That is what the prosecution asked for, and Trump, in his behavior, trying to repeatedly poison the jury pool, I think is going to make that prosecutor's date far more likely. There was an important brief filed in the case yesterday by Judge Michael Ludig and other former top Republican jurists and legal experts, and they told the judge in Washington, D.C., this trial should happen soon. The American people need to see it quickly.
Someone from social, one of my followers, says these indictments are starting to get old. Is anything ever to come from these investigations? Will Donald Trump end up in jail, which is really prison? Do you want to take a shot at that? I mean, what is the likelihood that he will actually serve prison time, or is that just too difficult to say, or is it irresponsible to predict?
Well, I think, again, he's entitled to the presumption of innocence. All 4 of these prosecutors are going to have to prove to a jury of 12 people that Trump did it, and prove it under the highest standard in the law beyond a reasonable doubt. So they face a heavy burden. I will say each of these indictments looks incredibly compelling to me. And the witnesses for, like, the Georgia one are not like Joe Biden or Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton. They're all Republican officials, 100%. So I think that they have enormous credibility in their witnesses when these things go to trial. And, I suspect at the end of the day, Trump will be convicted, yes.
Okay, let's talk about the special counsel By the way, you guys, I'm trying to get this question off. I don't know if it's blocking your face. If it is, I apologize, Neil. But let's talk about the appointment of a special counsel to investigate Hunter Biden. You know, it's so interesting in this country. People are so divided. There's still a huge percentage of Republicans in this country who believe the election was stolen, that Joe Biden is not the legitimately elected president. I don't know what we can do about that because I feel like we live in two different, we have, you know, alternative realities or alternative universes in this country. But, there are people who are concerned about Hunter Biden's activities and how either if they were unethical or illegal. So what can you tell us about the appointment of a special counsel, Neil?
Yeah. So special counsel is like an independent prosecutor, and what my first time at the Justice Department, I got to write the rules for the special counsels back in 1999. There's still the rules that Jack Smith is appointed under and the like. And the whole idea is to provide for day-to-day independence of the prosecutor so that she or he can do the job without political interference. And that's necessary because in our kind of a quirk of our system is that the president appoints the attorney general controls the prosecution power. So do you really want to have a presidential appointee governing, involved, the attorney general basically running prosecutions either against the president's enemies or against the president and his family? So that's the kind of case for a special counsel. Here, what happened is that Donald Trump's Justice Department appointed the United States Attorney, the Chief Prosecutor in Delaware, to investigate. Now, that is a Trump appointee, and that person was investigating Hunter Biden. When Biden came in and Garland came in, Garland did exactly the right thing. He kept that prosecutor on the case. So it was a Trump appointee. He couldn't be accused of trying to, stack the deck with a, more favorable prosecutor for the Democrats or for Hunter Biden or anything like that. So that went on for a while, and they tried to negotiate a plea deal, which fell apart. And at that point, this prosecutor asked for special counsel powers, the powers of independence. And Merrick Garland gave that power to this Trump-appointed prosecutor. So it's the same Trump-appointed prosecutor. It's the same one prosecutor that Republican senators were all saying, oh, should be given special counsel powers. And that's what he's got. He's not formally a special counsel under the regulations I wrote because you have to be outside the Justice Department, and this person is the
So he just
chief
has
prosecutor.
special counsel powers,
Exactly.
which means that, what does that mean exactly
It
again, Neil?
means independence on a day-to-day basis from the Attorney General, that he gets to basically call the shots as he sees fit. And that's the same thing that Patrick Fitzgerald was given back in 2004, even though he was the sitting United States Attorney. So there's a long precedent for this.
And that was for what? I remember him, actually. I think he was from Chicago.
He is.
Yes. Yeah, but that was to investigate.
I think that was Valerie Plame and all of that
right.
Stuff back then.
Right. Okay, so obviously to be continued. I'm sure that my followers have a lot more questions. Let me just check quickly, Neil, to see when are you going to be reporting the corruption of Joe Biden while the middle class is drowning in debt? I think Lindsey Graham says they've opened a Pandora's box in Georgia. What's that all about? It's just so fascinating to me how people process this new information about Donald Trump. He continues to insist that this is politically motivated on Truth Social. He has rallies. What do you think it will take for his staunch, loyal followers to start questioning not only his behavior, but his ethics? And if in fact, he broke the law and is a part of a conspiracy that tried to derail our democratic process.
Well, I'm a big believer in the legal process as a way to not just come to truth, but persuade Americans of the truth. And so, For example, in George Floyd, obviously there in that murder, there was incredible tensions and two different narratives. But I think by televising the trial and letting all Americans see it, a lot of people came to understand what happened on that day. Um, and I think that's similarly true here, which is why I think televising these trials is so important so that we can see it for ourselves. And if a jury of Trump's peers does what I expect, which is to convict him after an orderly legal process, after evidence is being produced, after Donald Trump has the presumption of innocence, and after the prosecution has to overcome that with the highest standard known to the law, beyond a reasonable doubt, and they have to convince all 12 people. If one of them says Trump didn't do it, Trump can't be prosecuted in that trial. If all of that happens, I do think that changes minds, Katie.
And of all these cases, which is the best case against former President Donald Trump? Is there a way to even measure that or compare them, Neil?
No, it's D, all of the above. They're all very strong, Katie, and I think we'll just have to wait and see. But some, like the classified documents stealing at Mar-a-Lago, are actually pretty simple prosecutions. There are not many moving parts. Others, like the January 6th prosecutions, both the Georgia and the federal one, have a lot of different moving parts. But obviously, tell a story about one of maybe the gravest crime against American democracy since our founding. So, they're both important in their own ways. Some are simpler, some are more complicated, but I suspect all are very, very strong cases at this point.
And in closing, if he is convicted in one or all of these trials, will he still be able to run for president of the United States?
That's an open question. There's the 14th Amendment bars insurrectionists from holding office. There's a new law review article written by some very prominent conservative professors last week, which the New York Times and others have written about, that says that he would be ineligible.
All right. Well, Neil, as always, thank you for popping on. Neil, by the way, has a terrific podcast called Courtside, which he started just a couple of months ago, and it's doing very well. Do you want to explain to people what Courtside, sort of the format of it, Neil?
Yeah, so the normal Courtside episodes are basically an in-depth discussion about one United States Supreme Court case with someone who's generally not a lawyer. Like Katie, you came on and we talked about the patents, gene patents, and particularly over the breast cancer genes, BRCA1 and 2. This week, I have a discussion with Aaron Dessner, probably the most prominent songwriter today, writes with Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran, about copyright law in music and about artificial intelligence. But I also do some special bonus episodes that are about things like this, about what we're talking about today in the Georgia indictment. So it's a once a week dive about the Supreme Court, but then we get special emergency episodes, and there'll be one in a couple of hours about what we're talking about today.
Unfortunately, there's a need for a lot of these emergency episodes, these special explanations for what is going on, because one of the sad things is there's so many problems happening in our country. There's so many critically important issues that it's just a shame that the people we elect, they need to do the business of the people of this country to help, as that gentleman said, the middle class, to help things like climate change, to help with problems of immigration, and to look at some kind of comprehensive immigration reform. And I'm afraid with all this going on that our government has become almost paralyzed. So hopefully we can.
Can I say one thing about that? Because I think what you're saying is so important. And look, there can be a debate about whether Donald Trump committed crimes or not, but he behaved in a way that is thoroughly inexcusable for anyone in the United States government at any level. And the consequences are all of these sprawling prosecutions, all of this distraction, instead of focusing on, as you say, immigration, budget, wealth inequality, climate, guns, 50 other issues, all of which now has to be, sideshowed because of this stuff. And, that's not a formal crime, but in a way it's a crime against the American people.
Anyway, that's a good closing statement. Neil, great to see you as always. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate
talk to
it.
you soon. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.